All right, so chapter 13, part 4, the Enlightenment. So, one of the most important people of the Enlightenment is John Locke, and he's one of the most influential writers in this period, was John Locke. So, he challenged both the divine right theory and the view of Hobbes. Hobbes was the one who believed that all people were bad and that you needed a king to keep those people in line. Locke believed that governments obtain their power from the people that they govern, not from God. So he did not believe in divine right. According to Locke, individuals are free in a state of nature. So you can do whatever you want. But what we do is we get together and we form a community, and that way we can protect ourselves. So the community then hands over power to the government. So we have leaders, and those leaders are supposed to protect us. So that's the social agreement. Leaders protect us from things that are going to happen, and we give up some of our basic rights. So the main purpose of government was therefore to protect life, liberty, and property. So you've probably heard that before: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He's kind of the one who comes up with that, but his is a little bit different. So life, liberty, and property. So Locke defended a people's right to revolt when the government abused power. So he believed that you could overthrow a king or whoever your leader was if that person was not doing the right thing. So his ideas were influential beyond the period in which he wrote. About a century later, his writings greatly influenced both the American and French Revolution, which is our next chapter. So here's Locke down here: life, liberty, and property. All right, another influential writer during the time was Sir William Blackstone, who was actually a judge. And he's an English judge, and he summarized English laws in his commentaries on the laws of England. So the book explained the English common law, a system of laws based on a judge following precedents of other courts. So what courts do is if another court rules uh, a law one way, then that sets a precedent, and the next court is going to rule that same way. So that's what a precedent. That's what precedents are. So Blackstone defined the rights of individuals in English law as well as property rights, and what rights you had to the land. Again, uh, didn't want the king to come in and take your land away, and those could not be violated, even by the king. He also examined England's. He also explained England's mixed monarchy, where power was shared by the king and parliament. So he did a lot of different writing on a lot of different ideas in England at the time. All right, scientific revolution. So the roots of the scientific revolution can be found in the Renaissance with the work of Copernicus, Galileo, and Harvey, and other scientists. The scientific revolution continued through the 17th and 18th century. It rejected the traditional authority and church teachings in favor of direct observation in nature. So this is going away from the church, what the church was teaching, and starting to actually look at more scientific ideas. The revolution in science was based on a new scientific method, which you guys do all the time. So in which people observed nature, made a hypothesis, so they actually made an educated guess about the relationships that they were going to see in this whatever it is lab experiment, whatever they're doing, and then they tested the hypothesis and through experiments. So Galileo, for example, conducted tests on the motion of objects to find general principles of physics. Scientists began to discover that the motions of objects could be predicted by mathematics. So you could use mathematics pretty much for everything, um, and we still do today. All right, so Robert Boyle, who was an Irish chemist from Ireland, he's sometimes known as the father of chemistry. Boyle conducted experiments on gases at different temperatures and different pressures. So he heated up gases, cooled them down to see what they would actually do. He found gas pressure increased as the volume of the gas decreased. So as it expands, okay, the pressure, of course, is going to increase. He also distinguished mixtures from compounds. So he explained the difference between a mixture and a compound. Boyle was one of the first scientists to perform controlled experiments and to publish his work in detail. And then one you should have heard of. So Sir Isaac Newton, The most influential thinker of the scientific revolution was Sir Isaac Newton. His book, The Principles of Mathematics, connected the speed of falling objects on the Earth to the movements of the planets, so gravity. Newton reduced all these patterns into a single formula, the law of gravity. Newton's discovery raised hopes that all the universe acted according to these certain fixed and fundamental laws. It seemed that all scientists had to do was apply observation, experimentation, and mathematics, and really we could solve pretty much everything. And that leads to the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment refers to an important movement in the 18th century of European thought. The spark for the Enlightenment came from the progress made by the scientific revolution. So the scientific revolution causes the Enlightenment to start. Enlightenment thinkers believe that by applying reason and scientific laws, people would be better able to understand both nature and one another. They applied the new scientific method to everything, not just science, but everything. At the core of the Enlightenment was a questioning of traditional institutions, customs, and morals. In particular, they questioned the divine right of kings, the hereditary privileges of the nobility, and the power of the Catholic Church. So here's some of your Enlightenment thinkers: John Locke, which we've talked about already, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. All right, so enlightened philosophers believed that nature and society operated according to certain basic universal principles. They were going to be the same, which they referred to as natural laws. They further believed that people could use their reason to discover these laws and then apply this knowledge to improve the quality of life. So here again, some of the guys that we've already talked about. So we haven't talked about very much. We'll get more into him once we get into French Revolution. So what each one of them believe, Hobbes, we've talked about, man is evil. Okay, Locke believed that man was good and could figure everything out. And Rousseau believed that man was good, but society had messed up man. Hobbes thinks that government is needed to protect the public. Locke thought that government is wanted for the benefit of the public. And then Rousseau thought that government is needed to enforce a social contract, which was a contract between the people and the citizens. I'm sorry, the people and the government. All right, Hobbes thought that government should be all powerful, and you cannot overthrow the government. So he was one of those guys who believed in absolute power. Locke believed that the government should be conditional, and you could overthrow the government if it was not doing what it was supposed to do. And then Rousseau believed it was arbitrary, and you could overthrow it. So really, you could get rid of a government at any time. The people were the most important thing. And then the last one, Hobbes believed that power should be not shared, so it should be only in the executive branch, so your main leaders. Of course, Locke thought it should be shared, and the main groups would be a legislative and executive branch. And then Rousseau believed that it should be shared and direct, which means that people voted directly. You don't need representatives. You could actually vote directly for everything, which would be very tough to do. All right, so the Enlightenment and the roots of democratic Republican government. So how the Enlightenment brings about democracy and Republican forms of government. So many of the Enlightenment thinkers were French. They were influenced by earlier French Protestants who, following John Calvin, had argued that citizens could challenge the actions of an ungodly king. They were also impressed by the ideas of John Locke, who had written that each of us is born as a blank slate. So our experiences then shape our personalities. This might mean that a peasant could be just as good as a nobleman if he had the same experiences. So if you're a peasant, you are given the same experiences as a nobleman, same education, you could be just as good. A lot of people didn't believe that back then. So Enlightenment thinkers were also influenced by earlier wars of religion. To avoid senseless killing, they favored religious toleration, all religions being able to get along with all other religions. They opposed torture and judicial proceedings, and many practices in France. Many of the practices in France, like the privileged nobility, that the nobles got everything, the power of the church, and absolute king seem irrational to these thinkers. And then here's some of your Enlightenment thinkers: Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and then Adam Smith. Adam Smith we'll get into in the next chapter also, but these are four of your big Enlightenment thinkers. And the American Declaration of Independence. So Enlightenment ideas were applied by Thomas Jefferson in the American Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration recognized the existence of natural rights, so things that all humans had, such as the right to life, liberty, and here's where it changes, pursuit of happiness. So almost straight from Locke. It states that the purpose of government was to protect these rights. This demonstrated the strong influence of Locke on colonial thinkers. And here's some of the colonial Enlightenment thinkers: Thomas Jefferson, Franklin, and Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense. So enlightened despots were what these were absolute monarchs who tried to use Enlightenment ideas to reform their societies from above. So they're not going to try and change the peasant's way of life. They're going to kind of trickle down rights from the top down, so from the nobles down. They often came from countries without a strong middle class, so there's really nobody in there asking for these rights. They felt it was up to the ruler to introduce positive change, so everything had to come from the king. They instituted religious tolerance, established scientific academies, and promoted social reform, but they rarely supported a greater sharing of political power. So they are not going to start a Congress or a parliament or anything like that to give up any of their power. So Catherine the Great of Russia, Frederick the Great of Prussia, and Joseph II of Austria were enlightened despots. All right, so some of the different things we've already studied. So, of course, your King Louis the 14th. He's an example of absolutism. He's the one who brought the nobles under control when he brought them to the palace, and he's, of course, the French king. Peter the Great was from Russia. He expanded the size of Russia, made it more like what we know today. And then, of course, he's a czar, which is a Russian king, which is kind of short for Caesar, and he's an absolute ruler also. And then Thomas Hobbes was what we were just talking about in the Enlightenment. Okay, he believed that people were not good; they needed a strong king, and he came from England. All right, and then John Locke, he was against divine right, and he was against the teachings of Hobbes, and he believed that people had the right to life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu, which we talked a little bit about, he believed in separate powers of government. So he's kind of the one who brings the three branches of government in, and he's from France. And then Rousseau believed the government should be the will of the people, and you should pretty much have direct democracy. And he was from France also. So your Enlightenment thinkers at the bottom, two monarchs up here at the top, and then a guy who really the monarchs liked because he said you should have absolutism. In summary, what we had at the beginning, the commercial revolution, that's where people actually started to get items that they wanted, luxury items, occurred as Europeans entered into a new age of global trade because of the colonies. Mercantilism encouraged the growth of European manufacturing and the establishment of colonies. As a result of the commercial revolution, Europeans enjoyed more goods and their living conditions improved. During the 17th century, most European rulers increased their power. During the wars of religion, rulers took control of the religion within their own country. They got rid of the power of the Pope, and they developed large standing armies, and they increased taxes. So all this led to absolutism. So monarchs justified their rule on the basis of interest of state. It was in the good of the state to have an absolute ruler. So that was for the good of the people. And of course, you had the will of God. They believed that divine right. They were chosen by God. And Louis XIV of France established the model of absolute monarchy, and really his will was the law in France. So in England, Parliament resisted Charles I's attempts to have it become an absolute ruler, and which leads to the English Civil War. Charles I ends up being beheaded. The English people then preserved their liberties in the Glorious Revolution when they brought in William and Mary. And William and Mary are the ones who end up giving in to the English Bill of Rights. And that's pretty much the end of the monarchs having more power than Parliament. And then you have John Locke, who wrote that government was a social contract and that subjects had the right to rebel against an oppressive government. Then you have Galileo, Newton, Boyle, and others developed new ways of investigating and thinking about nature and the scientific revolution. Newton found that the law of gravity governs how things fall to your Earth, and you could actually figure out how all planets move and everything else because of the law of gravity. So during the Enlightenment, European thinkers applied human reason to understand society and nature. They attacked traditional beliefs, hereditary privileges, the Catholic Church, and the power of absolute monarchs.